Much of my faith story has been heavily influenced by my parents. That, of course, is the case when you're a kid. My dad has been a pastor my entire life, recently retired, but growing up, we were in church all the time. Both of my parents, followers of Jesus, and modeled that at home, not just in a job. And but I grew up in very traditional churches, and I would like religious churches. And so as a kid, as you learn from your parents, like what's okay, what's not, what's right, what's wrong, what you do, and then you start asking the why questions, like, sometimes there's a reason for it, and sometimes it's a because I said so. But that also carries over into how you engage in church and what's acceptable behavior and all of that. And so, not by like trying to just make me follow a bunch of rules, but that's what it felt like when I was younger. And at 8 years old, I prayed. I knew what I needed to do. I know who Jesus is. I knew who he was. I knew what he did. But I asked him to save me out of fear. I was afraid of what would happen to me. I was afraid I was going to die. I was afraid of, like, what does this look like if I die? And so I wanted to, like, make sure that I was going to be okay. And so I asked him to save me, and life really didn't change because I still lived in a home where my parents modeled what it looked like to follow Jesus. And I went to church and was involved in different things that all kind of kept me between these guardrails of what does morality and a follower of Jesus look like. And it wasn't until I was 18, a freshman in college, that I realized that most all of my life had been a transactional relationship with Jesus, where, hey, I'm asking you to save me because I need that, and I'm asking you for help on here because I need that, and I'm only going to you when I need something, and that didn't seem like much of a relationship. And so at 18, I drew a line in the sand. I was like, I need to pursue you and follow you, and it needs to change the nature of this relationship, and it become a relationship, not just a transaction. And that's not what I said then. I didn't really even understand that's what I was doing then. That's just what God was working on me at the time. And so my interactions with God began to look different. I began to ask him questions like, what do you want for me? What do you want from me? What do you say about me? Who do you say that I am? And I like, who are you? Like, I want to understand more about who you are and why you do things certain ways, and that it just does mind blowing to me. And what does it look like to live out my faith in a way that affects the people around me, as opposed to just going through the motions so that I'm okay? And so that changed how that relationship was, how it worked. And as I grew in that, I participated in ministry all through college, mostly in the summers, and served at my local church. And God continued to grow me and put people in my path to encourage me and mature me in my walk with him. But one thing that constantly would happen is I would constantly get something like, this is the direction you want me to go, or something that you have for me, and then I would try to do it all on my own. Like, okay, I got this, and then just take off and do my own thing. And that's not what he wanted, but it's my natural bent. And so I would constantly be going back to this transactional, like, I got what I wanted from you, I got what you said, and now I'm going to do my own thing, and not trying to maintain this relationship. And that's been a struggle. It's a struggle to this day. That's how I naturally want to do things, is all on my own. And so fast forward, graduate from college, go into sales, and I was serving at a church, and I was heavily involved. I was leading a small group for high school, some high school boys, and I was involved in our children's ministry and like teaching and leading stuff on the stage, and very active in that. Yet when I'm at work, I'm just pursuing how can I make as much money as I possibly can. And it was kind of like, hey, God, on the church side of things, like I'm in whatever you want. But on the job side of things, I got this. Like I'm going to just determine the direction of my life. And I think all through that time, he's like, hey, I have more for you. Hey, and I just kept pushing that off, whether it was keeping him at an arm's length because I didn't want to hear what he had to say. I was afraid of what that might look like, or I just wanted to do my own thing and maintain control. And it was this back and forth battle. In 2007, at a company event in February, with my sales job, I got in a wreck with some coworkers, and it was a pretty bad wreck. The driver was killed. The two others that were in the car with me were immediately rushed to the hospital, and I walked away without a scrape or a bruise or anything. And God definitely rescued me in that. But what that did is it began this conversation with him of, what do you actually want from me? What do you want me to pursue? What do you want me to do? What is going to have meaning in my life as opposed to just chasing money, because that's not where this is, or opposed to just chasing lifestyle or fun. And so I began to ask these questions, and I began to try to figure out what he wanted. And it was a process. It ultimately led to me leaving that job. In July and August of that year, I went to Kenya for 10 days and was trying to figure out, again, what am I going to do? I was going to come back, and my lease was going to be up in September, and what's next? I need to find a place to live. I need to find a job. What do you want from me? And about 5 or 6 days into the trip in Kenya, we'd gone back to the hotel that we were at. And evenings, we kind of always had to get back before dark and then just hang out. We'd eat, and then we had a little bit of time to ourselves, and then go to bed. We'd crash. We worked hard and were pretty tired. And that evening, I was up on the roof of the hotel, just talking to God. And there'd just been this wrestle with control, and I finally just gave it up. I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm tired of doing things my way. I'm tired of wrestling with you on one aspect of life and then trying to let you have the other. I'm just in. Yes, whatever you want. I'll move here. I'll stay here on this trip and not go home. Whatever it is, I'm in. I'll do it. I'm not afraid of whatever it is that you have for me. And it was honest, and because of that honesty and finally getting there, I think that's why he responded, and it was so crystal clear. He said to me, "Good. This is not what I have for you. I just wanted you to be willing." And my response was, what? What? And I started to ask, okay, but then what do you want? What's the next step? What is it? What is it that you want to give me? What do you want me to do? And I got nothing. And I kept asking and kept asking. And I felt like he's just I'm not telling you yet. So October 1st, 2007 was my first day here at Grace. I moved from Houston up to Wise County the weekend before that, and then started here as the children's pastor, and really had no idea what I was doing, but knew that God called me here. And so since then, God has not released me from that call to be a part of Grace Fellowship, and I love it. But I've still wrestled back and forth between this transactional relationship, or transactional non-relationship really, to actual relationship, and whether or not I'm in control or I'm allowing Him to be in control of my life.
Well, unfortunately, that's still a struggle, and always try to fight and do things my way. And I've learned, I've matured a lot since then, but man, trying to do things your own way just doesn't pan out as well as doing them God's way. And what I've also wrestled with in the process of all of that is this, and I didn't even realize I was doing this very often until recently, but I would basically not say this to God, but my actions would be this way. Hey, I don't really want to listen to what you have to say, God, because I'm afraid of what you might tell me that might change how things are, and I like how things are right now. And so sometimes I just wouldn't even listen because I was afraid of what he would say. And as I look in Scripture and all throughout the Bible, I find many, many people that dealt with the same thing. But one guy that I just like, he dealt with a lot of what I've dealt with, is a guy named Abraham. And if you're not familiar with Abraham, it's the song Father Abraham. If you read in church when you were a kid, maybe you heard that. But his name was Abram, actually, before that. And where I'm talking about today is in Genesis 15. And in Genesis 15, he's still Abram. God changed his name to Abraham later. But God comes to him in a vision, and he says to him, hey, don't be afraid. I'm going to protect you, and then your reward is going to be great. And his response to God is, I don't really care about your reward. He didn't say those words. That's me paraphrasing. But he said, what good is your blessing if I don't have a son to pass it on to? He said, you have not given me a son. And in that culture, having a son was huge. It was shameful not to have one. And I don't have a son to pass on inheritance to, so one of my servants is going to get everything of mine when I die. Your blessing doesn't matter. And God responds to him and says, you are not going to pass everything down to your servant. You are going to pass everything down to your son. And then it says this in verse 5. It says that then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. This was huge. He believed. And because he believed, he was counted as righteous. He's like, I trust you, God. I believe in what you're saying. I'm in for that. Here's why the belief was a challenge, though. He was 76 years old. Well, fast forward 10 years, and he still has no son. Maybe he's doubting. I don't know. Maybe it's his wife. But his wife comes to him and goes, hey, I got an idea. This isn't happening right now, and I don't know, like, God said this to you, but whatever. Why don't you take my servant, take her as your wife, have a son with her for me so that we can get the ball rolling here. And Abram being dumb, sorry, I'm just saying that mostly because like I identify with him in just some of the things that he did. But he's like, okay, that's a good idea. And so he has a son he takes this servant as a wife and has a son there and tries to take everything into his own hands. Well, you know what, God, you're not doing things the way that I want you to, so I'm going to just take it in my own hands. Here's the problem. Abraham believed God, but he didn't trust him. And so it affected the way that he acted. God still kept his promise. At 99 years old, God reminded Abram of his promise, changed his name to Abraham. The name Abraham means father of multitudes. And at 100 years old, and God told him, not only you're going to have a son, you're going to name him Isaac. And at 100, they had a son. Through his wife, Sarah, Isaac. And if you're not familiar with who that is, just to kind of put a little context on that, Isaac had two sons, Jacob and he had twin boys, Jacob and Esau. And then Jacob had 12 sons. Those 12 sons, their descendants are the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And everything that you see about the nation of Israel all through Scripture, and even to this day, if you are naturally born like full-blood Jew, you could trace your ancestry all the way back to Abraham. It is who he is, who God created him to be, and only through God was his identity was able to be fulfilled. But no, he wanted to take things into his own hands. And I think that God would, if I was in that situation, here's what God, I feel like he says to me all the time. It's not about what you think. It's not about how you think it should go. It's not about your timeline. It's about staying connected to me through the process, and the end goal doesn't matter as much as staying connected to me through the process. And if you will hold on to what I have for you and remember that, it will help all along the way. Who I created you to be is very important, but the only way to get that is to stay connected and be obedient and walk in that with me. And I messed it up all the time. And when I'm honest, I have to say things like this. Maybe you have said some of these things or you haven't, but if you were really honest with God, this is what you'd say. Hey, God, I believe you. I just don't trust you to follow through, to do things the way that I think that they should be done, to meet my timeline of what I think should happen and when it should happen. Or maybe you're not holding on to any type of promise, but your prayer just is a transaction. Hey, God, let me tell you all the things that I want you to do. Okay, bye. And maybe just for you, the next step should be, instead of going, hey, God, here's all the list of things that I have, and it's like, bye, and you go on about your day, maybe you should stop and go, what do you have to say about that? And listen. And maybe he goes, yeah, I'm not going to give you that. Or, hey, maybe you should ask for something different. Or, hey, let me tell you what your next step is so I can walk in this with you. But we don't even give him a chance half the time, right? I don't trust you to do it. And so this transaction becomes just something that's easy to move on and do the next transaction, but there's no relationship in there. So as I continue to struggle with this, I want to tell you a little bit more about my story and how some of that is not as much of a struggle anymore, but I got to keep holding on to what he calls me to and what he reminds me of. So I'm going to blow through some of this pretty fast, but just history on the rest of my family. I met my wife in 2013 here at Grace, actually met her here in the church. We got married in 2014. We had our first kid in 2016. Her name is Harper Joy Rutledge. And everything after her birth has been a roller coaster. We've had a ton of medical stuff go on, and that's many, many stories around that. But there's a significant thing that kind of leads up to this last year I want to share with you. And so in 2019, my daughter's 3 years old. Harper is in a special needs program at Decatur ISD. She's going that fall 5 days a week. She's getting occupational therapy, speech therapy. She's getting autism specialist. And this program is incredible. And her teacher, Miss Tasha, praise God for her. Okay, she is incredible at what she does. And it's helping. But the one glaring thing that we see and that we're praying for is that she doesn't speak. She actually had no words at all and wasn't even making sounds. And there was no progress. And so we're like, God, we're just hoping that this happens. And her class is going well, but there's no progress in that. And that fall, my dad, in one of his times of prayer, God told him, you need to pray that Harper will speak in March. And that's a weird thing. Like, okay, I believe this. And I'm so thankful what he did is he then shared that with us. He told us and many people around him that I believe that this is what God said to me and this is what I'm praying for. And so we began to pray for it too. And we began to believe, God, we're believing and trusting in you that you're going to make this happen. And only through you is this going to happen. And she's going to speak in March. And other people start praying alongside of us with that. And then we get close to March. And guess what? COVID happens. 2020, super fun, right? Everybody has their own COVID stories. Mine was, this happened and now I'm ticked off, God. It was inconvenient for everybody, but I was mad because my daughter got ripped out of the one thing that was helping her more than anything else, and we had zero support. We're at home. I don't know how to do occupational therapy. I don't know how to do speech therapy. I don't know how to help her in any way, form, or fashion, God. What the heck? And I'm telling him this, I'm mad. And I think he's just like, yeah, okay. But see, I'm bigger than that, and you just don't know it yet. I mean, you know it, but you just haven't seen it. Guess what? She started talking in March with no help. And it snowballed April, May, June, July, August, and she is a chatterbox going in as a 4-year-old. We're back to school. She's in a pre-K program that's helping her with some of the other things that we couldn't help with. And God's like, hey, Jeremy, I don't need the things of this world that you put your trust in sometimes. I removed that from her so that I and only I can be praised for this, and I get the credit. And I'm like, okay. And so, God, thank you for that again. And it was only him that gave her her words. And man, she's not stopped talking since. And I'm thankful. Sometimes I'm like, Harper, never mind, I'm not going to say it. I'm grateful for your words. But I want to highlight something in that story that's easy to skip over. When my dad heard from God, he didn't keep it to himself. He shared with other people, and they came along, and we came alongside, and it helped our faith with other people believing in the promise that is not found in Scripture, was something that he said to him going, I want you to pray for this. And he shared it with us, and we began to believe alongside of him, and it laid a foundation for something that was going to happen a few years later that I did not realize was so very important. And as I began to prepare to share today and talk about this, I'm looking at some stuff, and I land in the book of Hebrews, and I had not read this way before, and God's like, this, right here, that's it, that's what happened, that's what you need to share. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And so Hebrews chapter 10, the whole book is awesome, the whole chapter is incredible, but right before we get to this verse, it talks about how as we have a relationship with Jesus, if you've entered that relationship with him, you have no separation or distance between you and God at all ever. That he sees you without fault, inside and out, only through the lens of Jesus, like you are clean in his eyes, and that we have complete freedom from all accusation. Now that's pretty incredible. That there is no fear, guilt, or shame that comes from him as we engage in our relationship with him. And then in verse 23, it says this, let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. So I'm like, okay, that's really good, but I need to have some more understanding. So I look it up, and I'm not a scholar at all. I Googled, like, what does this say in the Greek? And I looked just at the words, just the words that it said. And here's what was just absolutely a beautiful picture to me. It did, we'll go back. It did say that let us hold tightly to the hope, but affirm, that part, it said to the confession of the hope that we have. And confession literally means to tell the truth, but it also has a verbal component to it. That I am going to speak, and here, you can think something in your mind, but until you say it out loud, do you really believe it? And so the verbal affirmation, confession of the hope that we have. When I say that, that's what I hold tightly to. And I believe that God, and hold on to that he is going to keep his promise. And in verse 24, it goes on, and it says that we encourage others. I think it's pointing to this. And discover creative ways to encourage others to do good things. And yes, maybe it's because of a promise in Scripture. Maybe it's because of something that somebody has shared with you. But this whole picture is to share that and not keep it to yourself. And that's what happened with Harper. So fast forward a little bit. In 2022, the fall, I'm walking through my living room one day, and my wife surprises me with news that we are pregnant. And I'm like, okay, that's not what I was expecting to have happen today. And I'm kind of like reeling in my head, like, you're pregnant? Like, okay, what? I didn't think that this could happen. Like, I wasn't, like, we were trying to be very careful not to let that happen. And here's why. When we had Harper, Whitney had a lot of medical stuff go on after that. And there were some labs that we got back in part of that basically told us that if she gets pregnant, it could be very dangerous for her. Very dangerous for her. If we get pregnant, it could also, like, very, very, very high chance that you're going to miscarry. You probably will not be able to carry a baby full term. Like, this is something that you should try to not have happen, basically. And my understanding was that it was going to be hard to get pregnant anyway. So this was just not on my radar. So then as I'm processing this, and we're like starting to have some hope, like, okay, all right, this happens for a reason, maybe, and okay, God, like, walk with us through this whole process. And so I start to pray and ask God for that, and we go to the we're like 5 weeks along, and he confirms, yes, you're pregnant. But then they go to like try to find the baby and show us and listen to heartbeat or whatever, and there's nothing. And they're like, oh, don't worry, like, it's super early, like, come back in a few weeks and we'll do this again and everything will, go. Well, so we go home and we're like, wow, I didn't find that heartbeat, but okay, we're still trusting God, and we're excited about this. And we haven't shared with anybody this at the time. And then in that waiting time, things start to go where, like, all the things that would begin to happen to have a miscarriage start to happen. And I'm like, God, what the heck? Like, no, what is going on? And I start praying and crying out to God, and I feel like I'm not getting anything back. And I did something right at that time that I don't always do. It needs to be a staple of my prayer life, and I would encourage it to be a staple in yours. As I kept trying to cry out to him, and I felt like I wasn't getting anything, I finally stopped, and I asked him, what do you want me to ask you? When you feel overwhelmed, or you feel stuck, or you feel like you're having no direction, or you don't feel like God's talking to you, and you're trying, like, oh, I don't know. And it could be a complete curveball, like, what do you want me to ask you? Well, ask me what you need to confess, or what do you want me, like, it can go a bunch of different ways. But when I asked him, what do you want me to ask you, the response that I wasn't getting was immediate. He said, ask me for hope. And then I had that, sassy kid, teenager, like, I know, I'm already doing that. Like, I'm like, why would you ask me? I've already been asking for these things. So okay, God, I don't really know. I thought I was. How do you want me to ask you for hope? And he says, ask me for hope literally and physically. And then to my response is, what does that even mean? So I wasn't being disrespectful or anything in this, but I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, how do I do that? And I get nothing back. And so then I literally just say back to him what he said to me. I said, okay, God, will you give us hope literally and physically, like whatever that means? And immediately he goes, yep, yeah, I will. You're going to have a little girl, and her name's Hope. I'm like, okay. I've never heard something that specific from God, okay? Like, this is not just, hey, this is what happened. No. Like, I'm sitting here going, did that just happen? And so I start to question it. My mind's spinning. I'm like, I want to hold on to this, and I'm like, oh, God, you're going to do a miracle. This is going to be awesome. But then there's part of me that goes, I know what's happening right now, and conventional wisdom would say, this baby is not going to be born. And so do I share what God said to me? Because if he doesn't come through, then maybe I'll be embarrassed. Or if he doesn't come through, then what does that look like? Or if he doesn't come through, what am I saying about him? He said this, and then he didn't do it. Oh, and I wrestled with that for a little while. And I was like, no, I trust you and I believe you, and now I'm going to share this with other people. So I texted my wife and told her what I felt like God said. And I texted Bobby, one of my best friends from college, what was going on. I texted our staff and told them. And I can't remember when I told my family, but I shared that with them. And I asked them, pray alongside us. And they said, we believe the same thing, and we're going to pray alongside of you. And it wasn't but like a week or so later that we lost that child. And I was like, what? God, are you freaking kidding me right now? Like, how do you tell me to pray for this and then rip away all the hope that I had? Like, how does that happen? Like, I don't understand. And so, like probably many of you, especially if you're a man, all I wanted to do was isolate myself. I wanted to get away from everybody. I don't want to talk about this because now I feel like I'm questioning, did I hear him right? Was I making stuff up? Like all this doubt and just plaguing my mind. And my wife, in the process of all that, is dealing with this enormous amount of grief that no man can ever understand. And how do I even be here for her and love her through this process? And like, it sucked, all right? It was hard. But it led to a conversation of, do we want to see if it would be possible for us ever to even consider having another child? And part of that conversation from her was like, think you might be okay with this? Because I'm old. And having a kid when you're a little bit older was like, I told her when I'm 40, we're not having any more kids. So let's have whatever we're going to have before then, and then I'm done. But I turned 45 this year. And so we're well past that. I was like, I don't really want to have kids when I'm that old. New kids anyways. And so, right, I want to have mine that I have. But it led to this conversation that was really good for us. And I said, you know what? I'm in 100%. So we start talking about what we're going to do. And she's going to try to do everything she can to put herself in the best physical condition to be able to sustain a pregnancy. So she does. She does a great job. She did everything that she could in her power to make that happen. But it didn't change the fact of what had happened in the past. And so we go to the doctor. And here's the problem in all of that. We didn't invite God into that conversation. God was afraid. If I'm honest, like, I tucked that promise away and go, I don't really want to think about that, God, because you disappointed me. And I believe you, but that's kind of shaking a little bit right now. And we want to do this, but I don't really know. And so we made our own plans, and we go to the doctor, and we ask, like, we get some stuff done, and he tells us, there is no reason for you to not be able to get pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy and maintain that entire pregnancy, because everything in your labs no longer say what they used to say. I'm like, what? Okay, God, I think that you're in this, so let's go. And so we get to a point where we're going to try, and we get pregnant pretty quick. And I'm excited. I'm still not thinking about or holding on to that promise. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be disappointed. And I don't even want to say anything to anybody when we find out that we're pregnant, because I'm afraid that we're going to go to the doctor and we're not going to find a heartbeat. We go to the doctor and there's a heartbeat, a little bit more hope. And a little bit more, okay, God, like, walk in this with us. I'm scared. I'm nervous. And let me actually jump back a little bit. Months before we decided to start trying, we're in prayer time here with our staff. And we break up afterwards, after we meet as a big group, into just like pairs and pray together. And that particular day, I was paired with the guy that used to work here. His name's Colton. And I am just talking about Whitney trying to get healthy, all this stuff. And he just right there immediately responds to me. He goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. Y'all are going to get pregnant. You're going to have a little girl, and her name's going to be Hope. Because I shared that with him months and months before that. And he's like, I believe that. God's still going to do that. And it was a gut punch, like, ooh. I didn't want to hold on to that anymore. I wasn't thinking about it. It was out of my mind. But okay, that gives me a little bit of faith in that. So we find out that, yeah, we're pregnant, find the heartbeat, we're excited. A couple of weeks later, we're breaking up for prayer again. I happen to meet with Colton again. And I tell him, like, I make sure nobody else is around, because we hadn't told anybody at this point. And I said, hey, dude, we're pregnant. And he goes, it's Hope. It is, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, I think it is. And just his faith and his belief, like, gave me more to what a promise that God gave me, not him. And so we do this early blood test thing to find out if you're having a boy or a girl. This is a stupid way to think, right? But we get it back, and Whitney hands me the envelope, and I'm about to open it up and find out. And I'm sitting there going, God, this better not be a boy. I would love to have a son, right? But I'm just going, in my head, I'm thinking, like you said, like if this has to go the way that you said, I open it up and it says you're having a little girl, and I start to weep. And my wife's like, what's wrong? This is not what you wanted. Did you want to have a little boy? Because I haven't told her about what's been going on in me. I didn't tell her about what I talked about with Colton. And I say, no. This is the fulfillment of a promise. And we have a little girl named Hope, and she's going to be born, and that's who you're carrying right now. And I was so, she goes, you really think so? And I'm like, yes. This is what's going to happen. And all through that pregnancy, there were stuff that was like, oh, this doesn't look like it's going in the right direction. Oh, fears that she had. And when appropriate, I reminded her, God made us a promise. We're holding on to that promise. This little girl's going to be healthy. She's going to be born. You're going to go full term. And her name is Hope. And on November 25th, 2024, Hope Noel Rutledge entered the world. And she is incredible. Look at that. And I forgot how much sleep you don't get when you're a new parent again. God, and it's not as easy when you're young like it was when you were younger. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-month-old, and it's like, whoo, man, this is not what it used to be like. Let me. God just reminds me, my plans are better than yours, Jeremy. I got this. I don't need anybody else's help. And he flexed a little bit. A couple things, and we're going to wrap. After she shows up, God reminds me, hey, Hope and Joy, my other daughter's middle name is Joy, they always go together. And when we told Harper that she was going to be a big sister, we told her, my wife asked her, do you want to have a little sister or a little brother? She goes, I want to have a little sister. And my wife goes, if you have a little sister, what do you want to name her? She goes, Hope. We never told her the promise. I'm like, okay, God, you really? Okay, he knows what he's doing. Get out of the way. Let him have control. If I could encourage you with anything, it's a couple things. When you pray, if your prayers are transactional, try to figure out how to make that stop. Whether that's just to sit a little bit longer and try to listen, or maybe it's just to ask God, how do I talk to you in a way that's not just asking you for something? And if you ever feel stuck or you don't know what to pray for, ask God one of these 3 questions. God, what do you want me to know? God, what do you want me to do? Or, I don't even know what to say, God, what do you want me to ask you? He'll respond. And please, 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 if God puts something on your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Please make sure that you have people around you that you can share that with, that can come alongside of you and encourage you in your faith. And then if somebody asks you to pray with them for something that God's laid on their heart, or that they're believing, or that they're asking God for, come alongside them. But when you feel like God lays something on your heart to encourage them, don't keep it to yourself. Your faith and your encouragement were never, ever meant to be kept private. Just like Corey said before we got started today, your story doesn't need to be only told after that part is completed. Tell your story while you're in it, so that the people around you can join you, pray for you, and encourage you, and watch God do something that you never, ever dreamed would happen. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for just loving us despite how childish we can be sometimes. Thanks for being patient with me, encouraging me, and walking alongside of me all throughout what you've done in our life. We're so grateful. Help me to be an encouragement to others. and help each person here to take whatever the next step that they have is in their walk with you. God, we love you. In your name I pray. Amen.